We're going to take a welcome, folks. I'm seeing some folks come in as we start off our climate action meeting. Tonight is Thursday, August 19th. Good to see some good faces. I'm going to give it a couple moments for people to just come in. I'm going to go ahead and turn it over for opening remarks. All right, thank you all for joining us. I'd like to move us to the next slide and introduce Andrea Crooms, Acting Director of Prince George's County Department of the Environment, for some opening remarks.
Good evening. My name is Andrea Crooms, and I'm the Acting Director for the Department of the Environment. I'm not with you in Prince George's County today. I'm actually at a state conference, so I apologize for the screeching of seagulls and the occasional reveler in the background. But I'm so excited about how many folks are already in the room and how many folks signed up for tonight's public meeting. The level of public engagement that we've gotten around this plan is absolutely incredible. I get emails from you guys every day in terms of ideas and suggestions and things that make a stronger, more county-focused plan. So many people who signed up have been through other meetings with us, and so many are new here tonight.
Son nuevas el día de ahora. Esto es exactamente lo que quisiéramos. Esto es para que podamos tener un plan, que podamos entender cómo podemos tener en el manejo público. No queremos hacer un plan. No estamos dispuestos a hacer un plan de trabajo que nosotros no podamos ejecutar. Comienzo con todos ustedes. Necesitamos que todos los vecinos y todas las personas estén actuando juntos, trabajando para poder entender cuáles son los problemas y resolverlos en el condado. Este programa. Y no yo no puedo hacer esto sin ustedes. Eso sin ustedes no podría hacerlo. Muchos He estado trabajando demasiado para poder estar entendiendo cuáles son las necesidades, qué es lo que sucede en el condado, en nuestra comunidad, especialmente qué es lo que ellos necesitan, qué es lo que quieres que el condado se vea el día de ahora, el día de mañana, y qué es lo que queremos rehabilitar y cómo quieren que se vea en el condado. Generaciones después. Yo el día les pido por favor que vamos a regresar al trabajo que tenemos que hacer en los planes para poder ser más fuertes, entender cómo podemos cambiar, interpretarlos para poder reflejar cómo nosotros podemos hacer el trabajo. Hay oportunidades adicionales. Hay muchas de las personas que podemos entender. Una de las oportunidades es ser un advisor. Voy a darle la oportunidad a muchas de las panelistas que están el día de ahora, presentes. Muchas gracias por darnos la oportunidad de que podamos tener y le deseo lo mejor. Estoy muy agradecida de ser partícipe el día de hoy. Participando de esto.
I think my main request from you is to think outside the box, to not limit yourself, to not negotiate out of where we can go because we're concerned about what it will cost. We're concerned about the political ramifications of getting it done. We're concerned about the perception, whatever it is that you're seeing as a barrier, take a moment and step away from it. And again, think about what you want the county to look like and how we can build it together. So much.
Great,
thank you, Andrea. Hello, and welcome to this evening's meeting. My name is Dawn Hawkins Nixon. And I am a member of the Climate Action Commission and currently serving as the chair of this commission. Again, thank you for joining us this evening for a discussion on the blueprints, which have been drafted for inclusion in the Climate Action Plan. We are in the review and revision phase of the climate action planning process. The comments which we received this evening will inform the final drafts of these blueprints. As a member of the commission, I welcome your questions, comments, and concerns. Recognize that the success of the climate action plan hinges on buy-in and support for recommended actions to reduce emissions and to prepare for and build resilience to climate change impacts. When engaging in this evening's discussion, I encourage you to think about how the draft blueprints will advance our mitigation and resilience as a county. Also, just as importantly, please consider how climate action as mapped out in the blueprints will benefit your community. If you find the blueprints to be unclear on such benefits, please let us know.
Sean algún cambio en los planos, déjenos saber. En este momento quisiera reconocer a nuestro equipo de consulta.
Is our facilitator for breakout room discussions. Metropolitan Washington Council of Governments and CADMAS comprise our team of climate action planning experts. This evening, CADMAS will briefly outline community-wide emission modeling results and blueprints. And finally, Kayla Elson and the JSA team, who are also members of our consultant team, will help facilitate this evening's meeting. So with that, Kayla, I turn the meeting over to you.
Great, thank you, Dawn. So what I'd like to do this evening is review our agenda and our intentions for tonight. So the next slide speaks to the agenda. Following what I'm doing now, which is a process review, we'll do a quick poll to see who's in the room and get a sense of how folks are connected to Prince George's County and a little bit about that background and just get a sense. I know we're virtual, so you can't see faces in the same way. So this is a way to check in and who's interested and who's here. And then tonight's meeting, we'll have an update related to climate change in Prince George's County. So this will be an opportunity where the CADMAS team will share all of the blueprints being discussed related to the climate action plan and the results of modeling. And then from there, we really want to hear from you all. So the intent of tonight is to focus discussion in smaller groups. I know we're at 131 now and we're expecting even more, but to break folks into smaller discussions to dive deeper into the blueprints. We'll do 2 rounds of these breakout discussions. We'll introduce 5 blueprints that will be the...
Vamos a presentar 5 planes y que van a ser tópico de conversación para nuestro primer breakout de grupo, y después quisiéramos saber de todos ustedes qué es lo que debemos hacer para hacerlo más activo, más posible, y debemos hacer todo para poner así que una vez que comenzamos queremos tener las reglas. Estamos pidiendo de que hagan preguntas. A ver, personas, por favor, hagan preguntas. Hablen abiertamente y honestamente. Escuchen respetuosamente y detenidamente a cada persona. Como somos varios esta noche, por favor, necesitamos de que los comentarios sean breves y que estén enfocados.
And look for common ground. The next slide, I know we have been strong into the COVID times and the virtual reality for a while, but we still want to make sure that we have a quick check-in on the technology review for today. So at this time, all participants are muted. This is for the sake of making sure we can control the tech as we have early and quick presentations. But once you enter the breakout room, you will have an opportunity to mute and unmute yourselves. We will welcome folks to turn on their video as we're in a smaller setting if you're able to do that. And then of course, throughout the meeting, the chat is available for folks to ask questions, create comments. All of the chat will be saved for the public record, so we encourage those written comments throughout tonight. And then of course, we'll be utilizing the breakout rooms. We'll provide more instructions for that when that time comes. And finally, if you need any support with tech for any reason, please contact Josh. You can see his contact information here. All right, as promised, the next thing we'd like to do is pull up some polling questions of who's in the room. So I'm going to ask my colleague to go ahead and pull up that poll. You should see a Zoom poll pop up on your screen momentarily. And if we can move the slide forward as well. Great, so you should see at this point a screen in front of you that speaks to who is in the room. There are a total of 5 questions. Folks could take a moment and answer that. The first is, how are you connected to Prince George's County? Feel free to click all that apply. And then to see the additional questions, go ahead and scroll down the little box on your screen. If you're a resident, we're curious as to where you live in the county. The numbers are getting up there, about 65% participated. I'll give it another 15 seconds or so for folks to fill that survey, that poll out. Great, all right, let's share those results. Great, so as we can see in front, most folks here, I think you can see those results in front of you at this time, but most folks here, as expected, this is for Prince George's County. Most folks live in the county, and a lot of folks also work and shop. Some even own a business inside of the county. So we're excited for all of the ways you're connected to the community. We've got about 30% of folks here who live in North County. And another quarter of folks who are in the inner beltway, so inside of Route 95. It looks like we do have all areas of the county represented here tonight, so that's great to see. And as we scroll, we also have folks who reflect different races and ethnicities and genders and age, so that's really great. I'm glad looking at the age, we have folks as young as student and up to 65 and better, so that's great to see. Thank you for having this pulled out. I'm going to ask if this poll could be pulled down. And then I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to turn it over to Deborah Perry to lead us into our next part of tonight.
Thanks, Kayla. So I am going to kind of briefly, can we get the slides back? Sorry. I'm going to briefly talk about the Climate Action Plan, give you a little bit of context for tonight's conversation. For the most part, we are going to focus on the blueprints and the opportunities for action and your ideas about the action that's needed. But I do want to give you a couple of pieces of background information to help guide that conversation. I'll just wait for the slides to catch up. You can keep going one more. So I'll start with what is the Climate Action Plan. When we think about climate action, you can think about 2 different pieces. There's first the actions that are needed to reduce climate emissions, greenhouse gas emissions. And then the second piece really is the actions to prepare and adapt for the impacts of climate change that unfortunately we do know are coming. The Prince George's Plan will be a comprehensive plan in that it will take on both of these pieces in one unified document. So both climate adaptation, how we're going to prepare and be more resilient, as well as climate mitigation, how we'll reduce the greenhouse gas emissions and hopefully reduce the impacts that are felt. To get there, the planning process has included the components that are listed here. That's a greenhouse gas inventory, establishing targets, which I'll speak to more in a moment, assessing climate risks, developing the strategies, and engaging with the stakeholders and the community at large, as we are this evening. If you can go to the next slide. Again, a piece of context before we talk about strategies is to really think about what do we mean when we talk about these climate impacts for Prince George's County. And I'm going to do this in a single slide. We could easily spend an entire night talking about what these impacts can and may be. But again, we'll be brief just to set some context for everyone. So in general, we're talking about more extreme weather, some of which is already being felt. So you see some of these headlines that have run in recent years. We're talking about increased flooding, likely more extreme rain and snow events, and more extreme temperatures, particularly extreme heat, both days that are generally hotter than they have been in the past, as well as more hot days coming in a row. So these are some of the things that we need to be preparing for and becoming more resilient to. If you go to the next slide. As I said, the other piece was a greenhouse gas inventory and trying to understand where are those opportunities for action so that we can avoid the worst impacts of climate change. So what you see here at a very high level is the breakdown of where greenhouse gas emissions are coming from countywide. So this isn't specifically the county operations, but this is across the community. Seeing that nearly half of the emissions come from transportation, about a quarter from residential buildings and a similar amount from commercial buildings, 7% coming from other sources. I just want to note when we're talking about buildings, we're talking about both the electricity that is used in those buildings as well as the fuels like oil and gas that provide heat. So again, just starting to think about where we see opportunities to take action. And then if you go to the next slide, this is where we're thinking about how much action, how far do we need to go to achieve our goals. So to meet the global challenge, Prince George's County is targeting a 50% emissions reduction target by 2030 as compared with 2005. And that is a goal that's consistent with the goal that's been adopted at the regional level by the Metro Washington Council of Governments and a number of other communities in the region. And so what does it take to actually get to that goal? That is a very ambitious target. What you see in this graph, this is called a wedge analysis. So across the top, you see a dotted line with some dots on it showing you what the emissions have been back to 2005, which generally has been fairly steady, a little dip, on the decline, but generally fairly steady. What you're seeing, the black dotted line across the bottom of your screen is what it would take to get to that 50% reduction. And so the cumulative wedge is what a set of actions will, how far they will get you toward that goal. Some of the actions on that wedge, so the state RPS, that's a renewable portfolio standard, and that is the policy of the state to move toward cleaner electricity. And that really is a state policy, but you're seeing how that will play out for the emissions of Prince George's County. And then I know my labels don't exactly line up, but the orange is a solar target. What if we did a lot more solar energy? What if we did in gray, a lot of residential energy efficiency, in blue, commercial buildings becoming more efficient, in brown, the deployment of electric vehicles at an ambitious scale, and then smart growth is a small orange red line, then waste reduction and streetlights, a very small contribution, but wanted to make sure it was in there. So this is showing you how a set of actions might kind of stack up to work toward that goal. And I'm going to show you what some of that ambition looks like in terms of specific targets. But even with what we think were pretty ambitious goals in each of these categories, we're showing a gap. We don't quite get there by 2030. Again, it's a hard and a dramatic increase to get that far that fast. So to close that gap, likely a transition to a cleaner electricity grid even sooner is necessary. We can come back to talking about that more later, but that also has a double benefit when you're deploying electric vehicles. If you can power them with cleaner electricity, you kind of both clean the grid and get more kind of benefit out of your electric vehicle deployment as well. So if you go to the next slide, I'm not going to talk through every line here. This is showing you some of the targets that we put into those slices of your wedge. And again, just to show that we are talking about some really aggressive targets, things like 100,000 electric vehicles there in the middle of the screen deployed by 2030. There are currently less than 3,000 deployed in the county. At the top, a goal of trying to get 80,000 more solar roofs, whereas currently there are about 20,000. So these are really aggressive goals to seek for 10 years. We are looking to try to develop strategies that bring these things to fruition, knowing that that is the change that is necessary. So if you go to the next slide, again, I provide all of this as a kind of overarching context for the conversation about what strategies and what actions are needed. So some key takeaways: achieving the 50% reduction goal will require significant and systemic action. Key strategies are going to include transitioning the electrical grid to cleaner renewable sources and doing that fairly quickly, rapidly scaling up energy efficiency and solar energy implementation, accelerating the deployment of electric vehicles, supporting smart growth and reducing vehicle miles traveled, getting people driving less and using other forms of transportation, reducing the waste going to landfills, and enhancing carbon sequestration by planting trees. And when we talk about sequestration, we're talking about the opportunity to actually get carbon out of the air by planting trees and expanding the amount of forest. So on to the next slide. Through the planning process, we have worked with the county and stakeholders to develop and identify 27 priority actions, which you'll hear tonight called blueprints. Some of you may be thinking, if I'm saying so much is needed and so much, we need to accomplish so much, how can I say there are just 27 things on the to-do list? And it's definitely true that we often see climate action plans with hundreds of actions named. But it is our experience that when you name hundreds of things and they're not clearly prioritized, it can be very hard to focus, and it can actually create an inertia where it's hard to get started. You have so many things to do. So this plan is different. It's intended to focus on a fewer number of actions, but to provide the details and the clear steps to advancing those actions. It's intended to be a work plan to guide the work for the next 3 to 5 years, recognizing that the work of combating climate change is something we will be doing for decades. So again, not saying that 27 things will solve climate change, but these are 27 very high priorities to get started and to work on and to be actionable and specific. So let me review the 27. If you go to the next slide. I am going to run through these fairly quickly. I think folks have seen lists of these, and again, we'll do a deep dive on 10 that we think are particularly valuable to have community input and ideas. But to run through quickly on the 27, first, there are 5 blueprints that we're calling operational actions. These are really specific to the county and to commitments that they are making to operate in a different way to make sure that climate action happens. So those commitments include a commitment to advancing renewable energy, to education and outreach, to changing the way that land use planning and regulation occurs to support smart growth and natural resource conservation and green infrastructure, to lead by example. And you'll see that in a number of actions, the county seeking to lead by example. And lastly, an operational action around building the internal capacity of county staff, county agencies to integrate climate into all aspects of local government operations. If you go to the next slide, these are the blueprints that are more in the kind of traditional buckets, if you will. The actions we're recommending to, for example, transition to cleaner electricity generation. So those that you see here in green are the ones that we're going to have breakout sessions around. Certainly welcome input and feedback on all of the blueprints. Just wasn't possible to create time for 27 in a single evening. But under electricity, 3 particular actions that have risen as priorities: generating 50% of county electricity using on-site renewable energy sources, increasing the deployment of solar in both the residential and commercial sectors. And again, this is one we'll discuss tonight. Accelerating the deployment of resilient energy systems. At every opportunity, we tried to find strategies that did both reducing greenhouse gas emissions and building the resilience of the community. And this is one example. Under waste management, expanding the county waste reduction and diversion efforts. Under buildings, establishing benchmarking requirements so that we really understand what buildings are using and have the data to make good informed decisions, as well as accelerating implementation of deep energy retrofits to get to the building, the efficient buildings that we need to be future-proof. On the next slide, carbon sequestration, which I spoke about earlier. The county seeks to have no net loss of tree canopy, and in fact, to start moving toward increasing their tree cover over time. Transportation, accelerating the deployment of electric vehicles and the charging stations that are needed. Number 13 is about the county infrastructure, making sure that the county is using electric vehicles. And then the next is about a community-wide strategy. Supporting telecommute policies to reduce vehicle miles traveled, because we know that many folks have now stood up the infrastructure it takes to work from home. So let's continue to do that and continue to try to get people out of their vehicles. And then increasing investment in activity centers. Again, encouraging smart growth. And then the next slide. Again, this is a comprehensive strategy, also speaking to adaptation and resilience. So adopting codes and standards to have climate-ready buildings, expanding information and assistance to the public so they can understand their climate risks, implementing climate resilient stormwater management and flood mitigation, preserving and restoring natural areas to reduce flood risk, evaluating and addressing the climate risks to dams and levees, requiring all county agencies and government operations to understand their climate hazards and integrate that into all kinds of county long-range plans, including the CIP, the Capital Improvement Plan. Reducing the exposure of vulnerable populations to extreme heat, which, as I noted, is expected to get worse. Establishing resilience hubs in vulnerable communities, requiring community-wide climate resilient green infrastructure, and promoting healthy food systems supported by low carbon and regenerative agriculture. So again, I know I read those very quickly. There's a lot more information on various websites and also coming soon. These are the top 27 priority recommendations that have emerged through the planning process. So if you go to the next slide, I'm going to tee up the 5 that we'll speak in more detail in the breakout sessions. So on the next, actually, Kayla, do you want to speak to that? We'll have 5 sessions, maybe the logistics of that.
Sure. So before we get into the breakout rooms, I just had one clarifying question and then we can transition. So one question, if you wouldn't mind answering in the chat that came up, was what model was used to get the results that you showed and what were the assumptions that were made?
Sure. So that is a model that was developed at Cadmus and a number of assumptions. So the model is built around best available data and data for Prince George's County in terms of where your greenhouse gas emissions come from and a set of assumptions around future growth. It's fairly complex, but something we'll certainly be able to post more information, I think, as we release the plan on the methodologies involved.
Great. Thank you, Deb. And so with that, I see there's a lot of other questions coming into the chat. I think some of them are related to the blueprint, so hopefully folks will have a chance to dive into deeper conversation there. We do want to transition more into that stage. So I think that I'm hearing Deb just want me to walk through just the expectations around the breakouts and the 5 topics. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yeah, just the logistics of the 5 sessions, and then I can tee up the 5 blueprints that we'll cover.
Got it. Okay. So as far as how the logistics are going to go, there'll be, as indicated, 5 blueprints that have been highlighted. Momentarily after we introduce these blueprints, you should You will all be able to self-select which room you want to go into. So listen closely. If there's one that sounds particularly interesting, we'll have breakouts for up to 35 to 40 minutes, and folks will be able to move from room to room. So there's a couple of blueprints you were hoping to comment on or hear information about. You will be able to move to the different rooms. We'll have a text screen that walks through how to do that in just a moment, but you will be able to self-select the room or rooms you would like to go into for conversation.
Okay, yeah, if we go to the next slide, I can just briefly introduce each of the rooms. So a slightly deeper dive on the 5 blueprints. Again, this one is about increasing the deployment of solar on residential and commercial buildings by expanding partnerships, incentives, and financing solutions. So we know that the Prince George's County leads the region. You have more than 20,000 solar installations already, but that actually comprises only about 6% of the electricity accounts. And there's a huge opportunity for more roofs that are appropriate for solar. So naming the set of tasks and steps to try to really dramatically scale up the amount of solar in the county. Those steps that we've discussed include establishing a solar task force and really making sure there's a group accountable for driving toward that goal, expanding education and outreach, and making sure people are aware of the many programs that exist to support solar and the financing that is available, accessing federal resources. For example, the Soul Smart program through the Department of Energy offers free assistance. Expanding participation in solar financing. We know, for example, you have a green loan or a solar loan that has not been utilized. Either expanding the product itself or the, again, education and outreach. How do we expand participation there? And then establishing a residential PACE program, which is newly authorized by the state. So that group will talk about those steps and other ideas that you have to really dramatically scale up the amount of solar in the county. If you go to the next blueprint, this focuses on deep energy retrofits as well as community-wide energy efficiency. So to get to these incredibly ambitious goals to drive down emissions, buildings need to be dramatically more efficient than they are today. While there's been an emphasis on a lot of weatherization that might include some air sealing, maybe some lighting and things like that, deep energy retrofits is really a holistic deep energy program that gets to at least 50% reduction compared to before. So how do we get more buildings deeply retrofitted to be vastly more efficient than they have been in the past? Prince George's County, this is an opportunity to lead by example and to do this in their own buildings. When we think about steps, we think of assessing the current policies and programs, really understanding what's already out there to support deep energy retrofits. Again, supporting education and outreach, making sure people know the difference between basic weatherization and a real deep energy retrofit. Leading by example, as I mentioned, and then advocating for standards and financing to make this possible so we can get our building stock ready for the future. On the next slide, no net loss of trees, which again, I mentioned a couple of times now, but we know that the county is losing acreage right now. The tree loss of 7,000 acres between 2014 and 2018 is dramatic, and trees are really an important part of the carbon sequestration strategy. So the goal here is basically stopping that loss, maintaining cover at least 52% through 2030, and then really trying to actually increase that tree cover by 2050. And a number of steps named here, including specific revisions to different codes and ordinances, increasing violation costs, having more annual reporting and accountability, as well as identifying priority areas to increase tree cover and expanding the incentives for doing so. On the next slide, a community-wide electric vehicle strategy. So again, I mentioned earlier, right now there are fewer than 3,000 electric vehicles. How do we get to 100,000 electric vehicles in the next 10 years? This would be a comprehensive strategy. So that strategy would need to be scoped and be sure to be made inclusive. But really, in this case, we're saying what you need is a plan. You need to understand what the opportunities are and set a plan to get to that goal in 10 years. On the next, We know that the food system plays a really important role in a number of different ways as it relates to climate change. Obviously, bringing food closer to home reduces the transportation emissions. Local food supports community resilience. Regenerative agriculture improves soil health, which is important for carbon sequestration and can also be helpful for flood retention. And land conservation is also an important piece of climate resilience, as well as helping people select foods that have lower carbon footprints. So really trying to build a bridge between the local food work, which is really great in Prince George's County, and the climate work. So again, the steps here, to recap quickly, integrating climate resilience into that local food system effort, and really, again, building that bridge, expanding the education about the relationship between food and climate, increasing local demand and native plant production, and revising local ordinances to continue to support urban agriculture in a number of different ways. So I think that is the last slide. Those are the 5 breakouts. Again, some of the ideas that we have and the steps that we've laid out, but really excited to hear what you all think and ways that we can improve these and really, again, get to those ambitious targets. So thank you.
Questions in the chat as well as in person. Again, welcome back. I noticed we're recording, so I'll say that again for the recording. But thank you all again for being able to be part of both of those conversations and joining us tonight. I want to turn it over to Don Hawkins Nixon for some comments around next steps and other remarks before we close.
Sorry, guess I was muted. Welcome back, everyone, and thank you so much for vibrant conversations in the breakout sessions. And I had the privilege of joining the tree session as well as the flood session. I learned quite a bit from the discussions that were had during those breakout sessions. With regard to trees, I found it enlightening to hear the need that residents have for assistance with maintaining trees, right? So some of our residents have trees on their property that they would love to keep, but as we know with all things, as things age, they need to be taken care of. So the expense of maintaining trees can be pretty prohibitive for some of our residents. So I appreciated hearing that comment that maybe we should look for ways to help our residents to maintain the trees on their property. With regard to the flooding breakout session, I always looked at streamlining of projects to be a positive thing. But tonight I heard about some of the downside to streamlining the review of projects. Of course, when we do things quickly to get them out the door, we miss a lot, or we fail to fully include those other parties that could provide more insight on the impact of proposed projects on current or future conditions. So I do want to say thank you to our participants for sharing their thoughts, their information, and their concerns. So with regard to the next steps, the county will review the feedback that we received this evening, and we will incorporate this feedback into our blueprints. The county will continue working on the development of the Climate Action Plan to be reviewed by our Climate Action Commission. And lastly, we encourage everyone to stay engaged. You may visit our virtual open house. I don't know, I can't see if that last screen is or slide is shown, but you can visit our virtual open house to share more comments, to see or review the recordings of the community meetings. Also, you may visit our our climatepartners.org website to learn more about climate action planning in Prince George's County and in the region. We encourage you to please consider participating in our resident advisory group. And our next Climate Action Commission is coming up on next Climate Action Commission meeting, is coming up September 17th. So stay posted for more information on that meeting. So with that, I do want to say thank you everyone again for your participation, for your contribution. And I look forward to continue to working with you and other residents throughout the county as we continue developing the climate action plan. So thank you so much. And good evening, everyone.
Thank you all. Have a good evening.